the showboat of naval warfare.
あとわずか数戦で次のアクセスレベルをアンロックできます。
USS Washington were the first US battleships commissioned after 1923. First, the Washington Naval Treaty, and then the London Naval Treaty hampered the construction of new battleships in the United States for almost 15 years. By 1937, the engineers of the US Navy had defined the main specifications of a modern American battleship.
The main requirement was for those battleships to be able to pass through the Panama Canal.
Yuri Krichkov, historical consultant.
So the width of the Panama Canal defined the parameters of U.S. battleships. Apart from that, the 1930s saw the extensive use of brand new technological advances. Nevertheless, they needed to build a battleship able to win supremacy in a naval theater of war. Don't forget that at that time, battleships were considered the main type of warship. So they needed to be powerful, have good speed, and carry good artillery armament.
The design process for North Carolina began as early as 1928 and took 9 years to complete. In the following 4 years, the battleship was constructed and tested. Numerous changes were made to its design, and serious malfunctions were eliminated.
When the ship was completed, a serious problem surfaced. Her hull vibrated very strongly at certain speeds. They installed new propellers and launched her again. Then, trial run, another one, vibration again, and back to the shipyard. The ship often passed by New York's embankments, as if she was showing off. New Yorkers came in crowds to watch her. That's how the ship got the nickname Showboat. Finally, they managed to solve the vibration issue, and on April 1941, North Carolina was commissioned and became the main warship of the United States of America.
Main specifications of battleship North Carolina. Length, 222 meters. Speed, almost 32 meters. Draft, more than 9.5 meters. Total displacement, 44,800 tons. Main power plant, 4 compartments with 2 Babcock and Wilcox boilers each, and a set of General Electric steam turbines. Power, 121,000 HP. Cruising range, 17,450 miles at 15 knots. Armor, main armor belt, up to 305 millimeters. The main armored deck, 140 millimeters. Turrets were protected with armor from 178 millimeters to 406 millimeters thick. Conning tower from 178 to 406 millimeters. Armament, primary armament, 9 Mark 6 guns with a caliber of 406 millimeter, installed in 3 triple turrets.
This whole ship was designed to be a stable firing platform for these guns.
Ron Henderson, retired naval officer, tour guide on the North Carolina.
These guns could fire every 30 seconds. So imagine 9 shells, each weighing 2,700 pounds. Think about that. It's about the weight of a small car. Coming out of these barrels every 30 seconds, traveling downrange 20 miles to a target. Designed to go against another battleship and penetrate that battleship's armor and then explode inside.
Dual-purpose artillery, 10 coaxial Mark 12 mounts, caliber 127 millimeter, 10 times 2.
And they could fire against surface targets, that is shore bombardment, enemy ships, and the most important role they had for the North Carolina was in the anti-aircraft role. Battleship North Carolina was credited with shooting down 24 airplanes. Those are, of course, only the confirmed kills.
Anti-aircraft artillery, 4 quadruple mounts, caliber 28 millimeter, 12 machine guns, caliber 12.7 millimeter.
When North Carolina was in Pearl Harbor for repairs in September of '42, the 1.1-inch systems were replaced by what I'm sitting in now, the Bofors 40-millimeter quad mount. 50 caliber machine guns were replaced by Oerlikon 20-millimeter cannon.
Air Group, 3 Vought OS-2U Kingfisher aircraft.
The battleships in World War II would carry these planes for a number of missions. One of them would be to search out the enemy. Shot from the artillery, from the naval gunfire. They would also, of course, search for submarines, and should they find one, they could attack it. But they also played a big big role in World War II on the battleship North Carolina as rescuers of downed pilots.
Made at the last moment. Television said that Japan was building some super battleship. However, it turned out that the current was 60-inch
対応完了しました。敵駆逐艦を発見。
Saying, well, where did they all sleep? Well, they slept in berthing compartments like this one. Like 80 men
に亀裂が進水が止まりません
Historical consultant.
As a result, North Carolina and similar ships, her sister ships, became auxiliary ships for aircraft carriers, and they completed their primary combat missions as part of carrier groups.
On August the 7th, 1942, the United States began the landing operation on the Guadalcanal Island. The Japanese command concentrated their forces at the Cook base, preparing a strike against the US fleet near the Solomon Islands.
我が軍の勝利は目前です
On August 24, the Japanese launched about 80 planes. North Carolina was escorting USS Enterprise. The ships formed a circle around the aircraft carrier with a diameter of about 2 miles. It was the first battle for North Carolina. At 1712, the dual-purpose guns opened fire on the Japanese bombers attacking Enterprise. The fire was so powerful that a dense umbrella of exploding shells covered Enterprise, and the Japanese aircraft had to turn away. Then the ship was attacked by torpedo bombers from different directions. Repelling the enemy aircraft, North Carolina unleashed such a massive barrage from her dual-purpose guns, anti-aircraft cannons and machine guns that it astounded her allies as well. Admiral Kincaid from Enterprise asked the battleship's captain, "Are you afire?" They decided that the battleship was ablaze from enemy hits for 7 minutes of the battle, which eyewitnesses called nothing less than 7 minutes of hell. North Carolina shot down from 7 to 14 aircraft. The dual-purpose artillery proved itself during this engagement, and
they had a round called the AAC, or the Anti-Aircraft Common Round. It was a round specifically designed to do damage to aircraft. We also had a secret weapon in World War II. We had a proximity fuse on some of our anti-aircraft rounds. They had a teeny little radar system inside the nose cone of the shell, which would detect proximity to an enemy aircraft and detonate without actually having to hit the aircraft. And these were very, very effective. Of course, it was top secret. Even the sailors loading and shooting the guns didn't know that they were shooting. It was a well-kept secret until after the war.
Since her arrival in the Pacific Theater of War, and until the last missions in July 1945, North Carolina never engaged enemy battleships in a direct artillery duel. However, the battleship's artillery was used in all major operations of World War II in that region.
Now, North Carolina's history never got a chance to go up against an enemy battleship. Almost 2,500 rounds against shore targets as part of an amphibious assault. She was part of 9 shore bombardments against the Japanese-held islands of mainland Japan.
Near the end of the war, the Japanese were suffering defeats in one battle after another and losing losing ships, so they resorted to the kamikaze tactic.
We're standing on the signal bridge, battleship North Carolina. It was on this very spot in 1945, one of the tragic events of World War II battleship took place. And on that day, April 1945, North Carolina was steaming in company with the U.S. destroyer. So North Carolina was vigorously trying to defend itself from this kamikaze attack, as was the U.S. destroyer. The kamikaze passed over the top of North Carolina, crashed into the sea on our starboard side. The U.S. destroyer was tracking that kamikaze, and unfortunately it did not cease fire soon enough. So one of its last rounds, 5-inch shell, actually impacted this 5-inch director. And there were 15 men inside that director. 3 of them were killed instantly. The other men in there were severely injured, as were others standing around the deck. It was a very tragic example of friendly fire.
On September the 2nd, 1945, Japan signed its surrender aboard USS Missouri. The next day, North Carolina set sail back to the United States. On June 27, 1947, the battleship was officially inactivated and put into reserve in the state of New Jersey. The ship accomplished her task.
Escorting aircraft carriers became their primary mission. Those were battleships that bore the main weight of attacks from the Japanese aviation, both carrier-borne and land-based and Japanese kamikaze. Thanks to battleships, aircraft carriers could complete their primary mission, which was to deliver strikes on the enemy. So this was their purpose, to escort and defend carrier task forces.
North Carolina remained in reserve for 13 years. Then her name was stricken from the Naval Register. After that, she was purchased by her namesake state for $250,000 US. 2 seagoing tugs helped the battleship navigate to the city of Wilmington, North Carolina, where on April 29, 1962, she was opened as a war memorial.
Battleship North Carolina.
They were designed to be the best. They met enemies face to face, endured tragedies and enjoyed victories. They went down in history due to the bravery of their crews. They are the ships that deserve to be called
Everything about naval battles and their heroes, both warships and people. Dive in with the first World of Warships podcast. Naval Legends, Cruiser Aurora, Fortune's favorite.
At the beginning of autumn 2014, Cruiser Aurora went for another refit. Her 10th in more than 100 years of the ship's history. There wasn't anything special about her. Aurora was an ordinary cruiser of the time. Today, few remember the names of the other 2 ships of this class, while the story of Aurora is truly amazing. Her life was a chain of grandiose events and lucky circumstances that allowed her to survive and be preserved as she is now.
The cruiser class that included Diana, Pallada, and Aurora became unique.
Yuri Khrushchev, historical consultant.
Почему? Потому что...
Why? Because it was the first Russian-built class. All three cruisers were laid down, built, and launched in the Russian Empire.
At that time, it was more profitable for Russia to order ships abroad. Domestic shipyards required more time to complete the construction, and the cost was sometimes even higher than in Great Britain.
One might think that the ships should have been ordered abroad, cheap, quick, and efficient.
Kirill Nazarenko, Doctor of Science, History, Associate Professor, St. Petersburg.
However, there was one problem. Great Britain was our main potential adversary.
New protected cruiser Aurora and her sister ships, Diana and Pallada, were intended for two main tasks: operations on enemy supply lines, as well as reconnaissance and support within a squadron.
We're now on the legendary cruiser Aurora, launched in 1900.
Vladislav Palyantsov, Lieutenant Commander, Cruiser Aurora.
The uniqueness of the ship lies in the fact that, having lived through 3 wars, she's still in commission of the Russian Navy.
Length, 126.8 meters. Beam, 16.76 meters. Total displacement, 6,897 tons. Draft, 6.4 meters.
The engine is the heart of any ship. Here we have a closed-cycle steam power plant. Of the 3 machines, only one, driving the middle propeller, remained intact. It was built in 1900, but it is still operational.
Main power plant. 24 Belleville boilers. 3 3-cylinder triple expansion steam engines. Power output 11,971 horsepower. Electric equipment. The rudder gear was electrically driven, but could also be actuated manually or with steam.
We're now in the steering compartment of cruiser Aurora. It was used to manually shift the rudder blade and turn the ship around. One man alone could barely rotate the helm. To overcome the water resistance, the efforts of 3 men were needed. It is perfectly preserved years ago.
Armor. Armored deck from 38 to 63.5 millimeters. 4 millimeters.
At the end of the 19th century, good first-rank cruisers had the thickness of their conning tower armor equal to the caliber of their main guns. On Aurora, it was 152 millimeters.
Armament at the beginning of the Russo-Japanese War. 8 cannon guns, caliber 155 millimeters. 24 cannon guns, caliber 75 millimeters. 3 wide torpedo launchers, caliber 381 millimeters.
Initially, the main armament of the ship consisted of 8 Cannae guns with a caliber of 152 millimeters on the upper deck. Additionally, 24 guns with a caliber of 75 millimeters were installed on the gun deck. For the cruise to the far east, optical sights were mounted on all guns. The thickness of the armor sheets on each gun is 25 millimeters.
Maximum speed 9.2 knots. Cruising range 4,000 nautical miles at 10 knots.
Overall construction. Initially, it was a project aimed at fighting against cruisers were being constructed. A new enemy, the German Empire, is baffled came to the stage. Task was this was the 3rd geopolitical task in the world. This wasn't only 3 ships, it was a challenge. That's why during their construction, the cruise's purpose and classification changed from time to time.
Shortly after the commissioning trials in 1903, Aurora headed to the Pacific Ocean, accompanied by other ships. The Pacific Squadron of the Russian Empire. During that cruise, Aurora received the order to return to port due to the Russo-Japanese War that had commenced recently.
Starting from the spring of 1904, the 2nd Pacific Squadron was formed.
Kirill Nazarenko, Associate Professor, St. Petersburg.
It was one of the most difficult voyages in naval history. The ships covered 18,000 miles over the course of 223 days. Aurora called at a port only once, in Tangier. All other numerous instances of traveling to
This could last for hours, in large ships. However, that wasn't the only problem. After coaling was finished, all surfaces had to be washed because all superstructure elements were literally coated with coal dust, which not only caused overheating, but also harmed the health of crew members.
The Russian squadron was led by a Japanese fleet under the command of Admiral Togo at the Korea Strait. At 1349, the Battle of Tsushima commenced.
The events progressed in a worst-case scenario. The Russian squadron was utterly defeated. 4 brand new battleships were sunk. Was heavily damaged and barely stayed after
it started. In the company of other cruisers, she defended transport ships against the Japanese superior forces. The Japanese pelted Aurora with fire. During the battle, the number of hits received by the cruiser amounted to almost 20.
During the Battle of Tsushima, the ship fired about 2,000 shots and received 18 hits.
Vladislav Valyansin, Lieutenant Commander,
Small fragments. The first smokestack was barely holding up. Breaches of more than 43 square feet each. Shells in the forward part of the ship. The biggest breach on the gun deck was about 21 square feet. The conning tower was hit twice, having broken the hammock netting and steel ladder. The fragments of the exploded shell flew into the conning tower. 4 people were injured, and the ship commander, Captain Yegoriev, was fatally injured.
98 people died or were injured, a sixth of the crew. All main and secondary guns were damaged. However, the crew of cruiser Aurora kept their chins up.
3 people worked at each boiler. 1 would open the doors, and 2 others would shovel the coal into it. During the Battle of Tsushima, 144 people were throwing coal into the boilers at temperatures of almost 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 28 hours without stopping.
Aurora withstood the day, despite the damage received, and once it was dark, the cruiser managed to break through the tight encirclement of the enemy destroyers and shake off their pursuit.
In that situation, Admiral Enquist, the commander of the cruiser squadron, made the absolutely correct decision not to break through to Vladivostok. By returning to Manila, Enquist saved the ships for Russia.
Named after the goddess of the dawn and starry sky, the cruiser was fortunate from the very beginning to be among the 10 surviving ships and return home after the Battle of Tsushima. That Aurora was born under a lucky star?
Almost the entire battle core of the Russian fleet was destroyed, and even ships that were considered obsolete, like Aurora and Diana, which had survived the Russian war, could still be useful to the fleet.
In 1909, cruiser Aurora became a training ship and entered the First World War with that status.
Aurora was part of the 2nd Cruiser Squadron of the Baltic Fleet. Its main mission was to not let the Imperial German Navy reach St. Petersburg, so laying the minefield in the Gulf of Finland was a priority task. The cruiser's job was to patrol these minefields and support destroyers. That's all. So Aurora fulfilled those tasks.